This is the UX Institute podcast, and I'm Mark Swain, founder of UXI. In this podcast, I interview UX and product leaders from around the globe. So, I have finally gotten to speak with an industry hero of mine, a futurist designer that has had a magnitude of effect and influence on my early design career. In this podcast, we are going to take a trip back in time to when Flash was one of the primary design tools for the web, and usability and web standards were, well, let's say, less discussed, and web design was more of a blank canvas. As a young interaction designer in the early to mid-2000s, starting out, most of my design conversations with college friends and workplace colleagues were based around his work, his clients' work, his company, and the beautiful, slick, and well-timed animation production work in Flash that you could only aspire to. As a kid, fresh out of design college, I waited in front of my Apple G3 for his new company website to load, sometimes with popcorn. It wasn't always his company's client work that attracted so much attention globally. It was the actual design of the websites he created for his own company, 2Advanced Studios. The depth of creativity, the animation, and the powerful futurist soundtracks that he created influenced and inspired designers worldwide for years. There was no other designer in the world doing what he was doing at this time. It is such an honor that I have finally gotten to speak with Eric Jordan, futurist designer. I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome to the podcast, Eric.
Thank you, Mark.
It's been a long ambition of mine to finally be able to sit down and have a conversation with you about probably the biggest and influential design studio in my career, when I first started out in college and onwards into my early career. So it's really quite something to be able to talk to you about a lot of the projects of the actual 2Advanced websites that were launched that created hysteria around the world. Had me sitting down with a bowl of popcorn waiting to launch it. That happened many times. I thought maybe we could chat a little bit about first maybe kicking into kind of around the late 90s when you kind of started in website design, I guess. Were you always a creative? Did you grow up that way and you just naturally got in through some of the music and design?
I always had kind of like a crazy, vivid imagination, and I pretty much lived inside my head for most of my childhood. I fell totally in love with computers when I was really young. Like maybe I was like 10 or 11. And this is back in the days of, I don't know if you know, like bulletin board systems. Like they were basically, you would dial into the computer and it was like all text-based, this was way back then. I had wanted to be like a comic book artist. I would basically scan all my artwork into Photoshop, and then I would try to figure out how to color it. And somehow I ended up joining this digital art group that was called ICE, and we would release these digital art packs every month. And that's kind of how I developed my graphical skills, But at this time, I'm not really thinking about doing this professionally. I'm just kind of having fun and just experimenting. I don't really know what I'm going to do with my life at this point. So I decide I'm going to go study design, and I choose Cal State University, Long Beach. I think I left after one semester because I couldn't get into it. I didn't feel like I was learning very much. And college isn't for some people. And I was one of those people. So I basically figured, maybe I should go focus on my other love, my second love, which is music. And I'd been a drummer in a punk rock and reggae band. We were playing a lot of big shows. And then I started to kind of move into DJing, and I was playing trance and acid house at events and things. And I met this guy who was kind of into the same music, and he was into computers too. And he sits me down one day and he shows me this software. He says, "This is something called Flash. It's brand new."
Yeah.
And he shows me the site. It was called i4u Media. And it basically had this circular animated nav system. And it's one of those moments when just everything kind of comes to a stop, slow motion. I was just totally blown away. I'm thinking, okay, this is what I can use to tell stories. I can bring my audio in and I can build experiences with this. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I want to do this. And so that's when I chose, this is what I'm going to do basically with the rest of my life, was when I was introduced to Flash.
Amazing. What year was that?
I think that was like maybe like 97, between 95
Yeah.
and 97, somewhere in there.
Some similar patterns to myself. I was at a crossroads between design college and music college. I was accepted into London School of Music. I'd been playing guitar since I was extremely young too. And design took me on the route. I think it seemed the most viable thing to do at the time. I still have a massive love for music as well. I play guitar a lot still today.
Wow.
So that's how it really started for you. And was it after that moment that you described that you kind of went straight into Flash web design and started to explore all that and develop your design skills further?
Yeah, so I basically decided like, okay, I'm going to teach myself Flash. And I applied for a design job at like this tiny hole in the wall. It was called Binus Group. And I just started building like random Flash sites for companies. And hardly anyone was using Flash to do this. So I was kind of like having to learn on the fly. And I was doing a ton of just kind of experimenting like in off hours. And I basically designed like the first version of 2Advanced there at Binus, and I launched it, and then it just like went crazy. Like I started getting all these emails. It was this big explosion that happened. And then I got approached to write a chapter in the New Masters of Flash book. I think you probably might remember that.
I do. I remember those books. Yeah.
And that's kind of what set everything in motion for me. So I had created 2Advanced at Binus, but I was in a weird position because they started saying like, well, you created this at our offices. So basically we own 2Advanced.
Oh no.
And I was like really like kind of freaked out by that.
Yeah.
So this kind of freaked me out. I was like, oh my, what the heck am I going to do? You know, these guys are going to like try to take this from me. It was just kind of, I was taken aback. I didn't really know what to do. I felt kind of uncomfortable being there. So I figured maybe I should look for a job somewhere else. So I applied for a creative director position at this place called Design Insights, which was in Laguna Beach, California. Yeah. This is where I met my future business partner, Tony. And he was really good with like legal stuff. So he basically says, okay, I'm going to make sure that 2Advanced remains under your ownership. And he starts writing Binus Group these kind of like scary legal cease and desist letters and kind of freaks them out.
Wow.
And then they kind of give it up. Where I joined Design Insights as a creative director. And then Tony and I kind of became friends. And he was really into the whole Flash thing. So he gets behind me 100%. And we started pushing Flash like majorly at that studio. All of a sudden, we started getting Flash projects, and I kind of had to figure out how to incorporate Flash into these big client projects we were getting. That's where it was the start of like the big professional push with Flash.
Wow. And did Tony become kind of the technical lead with you, or what kind of figure did he become in the company with you?
He was a good complement to my personality because he was very business-minded, very entrepreneurial. And so we kind of balanced each other. You know, I'm somewhat introverted and artistic. So, you know, we just were on kind of different polarities. But it really worked out in the end in terms of us becoming business partners in the future, just the way our personalities complemented each other. So he took on like sales and kind of project management.
Gotcha. And so the music that was incorporated to that first launch of 2Advanced, was that created by you too?
Yeah, a lot of the music and things were sounds that I was producing. And later on, I actually had, we had another audio producer by the name of Elijah, and we would sometimes collab. In fact, All of Prophecy was me and Elijah kind of collaborating on some audio. But yeah, like audio is a huge part of what I was doing with Flash. Sometimes audio was turning off a lot of people, but I thought websites should feel like an experience, almost like a film, you know, with a soundtrack. I just thought it would just draw you into the experience.
Like if I remember some of the site launches of 2Advanced every couple of years or so or more, when I think about Prophecy and I think about Attractor, the music that you created and put to those sites, which is now today obviously not a trend, at that time in terms of what you were doing was phenomenal. It totally created its immersive experience, atmosphere that just hooked you in. It was like you're in a movie, watching a movie or feeling a bit of a futurist movie feel to it. The quality was just off the charts.
You know, I'm a very artistic minded person and I'm very in tune spiritually and I wanted the website to feel like an experience. I didn't want to feel like a corporate website. That's not interesting to me.
Yeah.
I want it to be emotional. I want it to be like a film. We can kind of talk about when I built the 2Advanced website. I was kind of in this elevated state of consciousness at the time, just in terms of the music I was listening to and what I was going through spiritually. I was DJing these underground parties like in Joshua Tree in the middle of nowhere under stars, and there were like lasers everywhere. And it just put me in this total shamanic mindset of taking people on a journey. And I was reading a ton of William Gibson at the time and other cyberpunk authors. And so my imagination was sort of tuned into this futuristic channel, like in overdrive, and all this energy had kind of built up to the point where we decided to launch expansions. I took all that energy that was kind of building up into me and I put it all into that. It was kind of like an alchemical process where you channel a bunch of energy into something and then it sort of embodies that energy. And then when people experience it, it's like that energy gets transmitted to them. That's kind of what was happening. Yeah. The expansion site has a ton of symbolism in it that represents kind of the evolution of humanity and the beauty that's in that. And that's why I think the expansion site kind of resonated with so many people, was just because it embodied that energy that I was trying to kind of communicate.
For those sites, and even starting with expansions, you can totally get that feeling from the music that you created and put behind that. It just allows you to sit down and think. Amazing. And so just back to the point on the name 2Advanced and where that came from.
It comes from kind of a sense of feeling too advanced for this time period, and just kind of dreaming about the future and kind of the destiny of humanity.
Getting into that futurist feel to all of your work. I mean, when we look at the 2Advanced site launches, we look at the deep detail of design and effort and execution in the backgrounds, the static imagery. I remember in a tractor, we had the Japanese gardens, we had the volcanoes, just these absolutely beautiful photoshopped backgrounds and work. Were you executing most of the Photoshop work around most of the design elements that way too?
Yeah. At the time, we had actually had a client by the name of Noman. They were a company that was releasing a lot of educational materials around kind of like matte painting for the visual effects industry.
Okay.
And before I wanted to do animation, I kind of had it in my mind that I wanted to get into visual effects somehow because I was a huge Star Wars fan and I was deeply into sci-fi. At the time, Noman had provided us with a huge library of kind of the materials that they had. And I decided, just as we were approaching the launch of Attractor, it was funny because it happened so quickly, but it was like a month before I decided, I want to try building a series of matte paintings for each of the pages. They would be like their own environments that would draw you in. They'd just be kind of these themed environments. And so I think it was a couple weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, and I painted every single one. And then we just incorporated it into the Attractor site and then built the animations on top of all that.
Amazing. Because if it's one thing I was so hooked on was the level of detail in the animations that layered on top of beautiful abstract imagery in Flash. And that was the small flashes, the lines, the outline circles that were spinning back and forth, the lines shooting off to create shapes and then pop off the screen at great speed in Flash. And there was a lot happening, there's a lot of that in Prophecy too. The excellence in the timing, the positioning of elements, the smoothness. Even today, going back and looking at some of your sites, and looking at some of the videos of them on YouTube even, it is stunning animation. How to get Flash that succinct was incredible from a framing perspective.
Thank you. And, I think I can attribute a lot of that to my background as a drummer. Right. That focus on building a rhythm with different types of drums. I would totally relate that to Flash in terms of I would use the tempo and I would offset little elements so that, you could draw the user's eye around the screen and really kind of build the experience for them. But you could also do it in such a way that was so precise it wouldn't get bogged down. The player would still play quickly and everything would load really quickly just because we would spend so much time in detail trying to figure out how do we get it to load quickly?
Yeah.
What are some little animations that we could do to entertain your eye while something else over here is loading? There's always little things that we're trying to engineer to make the site perform really quickly, but also make it like beautiful at the same time.
Amazing. And so while all this was going on, obviously 2Advanced had so many amazing client projects, so many car brands to PlayStation, the list goes on.
Yeah.
And, if I recall some sites, like some of the Ford sites for some of the trucks you guys did, I always remember the Mustang site where the Mustang would skid off in the dust and come back again.
And I have to give props to Shane for that one, because Shane really took a major lead on that project and really brought a lot of the detail, like in terms of the skidding of the dirt that flies up from the tires and things. And Shane was really kind of my right-hand man at 2Advanced.
Okay.
And we would vibe off each other. I'd say, like, let's do this. And he would say, okay, we could do that, but let's take it a little bit this direction. And we would just kind of vibe off each other and push it. And he would push it more and I would push it a little bit further. We just had this like design language that we intuitively knew where we were headed with the project. And he would just push the envelope a little bit further. And that's what made those sites, what they were.
So what were some of your favorite client projects that you delivered during the time at 2Advanced?
Nintendo's Metroid was one of the big sites where we really kind of tried to push things in terms of it being a little bit like very interactive and gamified. The more you would kind of discover and dig through the site. So Metroid was a huge one that I absolutely love kind of engineering and putting together. And there were some fun aspects of that too, because there was like some secret sites that we built as part of the viral campaign, and building that site really taught me to think like an ad executive on like a higher level of like, what are the viral components that we can build for this project that will bring it attention? So those are things about the user experience that kind of helped me think on a higher level.
What did it look like when you engaged clients back then? Was it workshops with the client? Did you run through low fidelity wireframes of ideas and develop storyboards out into architecture? Was UX research practiced on some of your projects the way it is today?
It was a really strange time because back then everything was moving so fast. UX practices were almost being figured out in real time on the fly. Because Flash was this medium that kind of broke the whole notion of traditional web design.
Yeah.
So I do remember having to evolve my thinking as a designer to sort of think like an ad exec on a higher level and bring in some of the practices that we would need to make it a successful project. Eventually we honed in on like precise process for UX. Every project was pretty much different. I remember we built this site for KB Homes and the site was gigantic and we had to do a very deep analysis of like every single page at every micro level because they were very into metrics and all those types of things. So that was one of the big projects where UX was like everything. That was the main aspect of that project, was all the UX, because it was a gigantic site. And they wanted to make sure that it had metrics that they could gauge all the different actions that people were taking on the site. So KB Homes, that was a big one. It was interesting because there was this usability expert at the time by the name of Jacob Nielsen.
I know Jacob Nielsen, yeah.
There's this kind of funny rivalry between us in terms of, how much you box yourself in to like a rigid practice, and I always kind of wanted to paint outside the lines. I understood and appreciated the concept of, usability and UX and everything. But I always felt like we were trying to build this arbitrary box around the experience. And I wanted to kind of let it all kind of breathe. It's interesting. I've been watching these interviews with Nirvana and Smashing Pumpkins. They're like some of my favorite bands. And they talk about working on a song and using riffs and chords that sometimes they're not actually proper to play in terms of like music theory, but they're in service to the song. And so that's kind of how I feel about UX sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I know exactly what you mean. That's really interesting, when it comes to Jacob Nielsen stuff. And when we look at the Norman Group today that are best practice around UX and they do so much amazing work in that area. To think of those as examples, it's a really interesting conversation area, right? Because where we've come from in the early 2000s in terms of web design, Flash, all the beautiful stuff that was done. And then we have this line or border we cross where maybe it could be even perceived today that even the work I do from a UX research and implementation perspective around large SaaS projects, tech projects all the time, is that the creativity is a little dried up. It's a little gone. The painting outside the lines is a little dead. I feel it sometimes because I'm a creative at heart. That's how I grew up too. And even though like we train and mentor at UXI and we deliver so much stellar UX work, it's quite formulaic sometimes. It feels a little systematic. That spark seems to get lost sometimes in your work. I don't know if you've ever experienced that or you kind of understand the kind of idea I'm trying to generate there.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the industry is too boxed in sometimes by the process. And I hear this all the time, that the web feels like it's getting over templatized and everything kind of follows these guidelines and practices to where most of the magic is kind of sucked out of it. And I mean, don't get me wrong, like I think all those fundamentals are so important, you know, for the types of projects. But other times I feel like they're being used just for the sake of being used, or they're being shoehorned in just to like fit into like a case study. But the biggest message I get is that it feels like the web has like lost a lot of the magic in terms of like experiencing things and the rawness and some of the just kind of go for it experiences that used to be built back in the day. You know, the experimental stuff that kind of took risks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I think about a lot of the projects that we're executing today as well, it's heavily B2B SaaS based. It is templatized, quite linear, and you're always trying to see what you can do more with your components, your buttons, your layouts, your cards, your navigation patterns. Can I push them a little further? Can I do a little more that's not going to look like the 5 other platforms like them? And sometimes you're a little afraid to push it a bit further. And even when it gets into design system creation and generation, and we look at all our objects that we're creating, all our components and versions, how can we push it a bit further? It's constantly on top of my mind all of the time to try and break out of that a little bit. I would say since about 2011-12 time, we have been heavily boxed in since then into a very process-driven, everything really way of doing things.
Yeah, you can definitely notice that trend. But I do think then things sometimes work in cycles. And I've noticed a lot of desire to kind of return to a little bit of the looser form experiences of back in the day. And I was just talking with a company called Rive. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they're developing a new tiny format vector animation type of file. It can basically display really quickly, but it can contain all sorts of incredible animation. So there's people building new tools that are going to try to hopefully break that dry trend of things just feeling so mechanical, which is good.
Visit uxinstitute.com to sign up to our new newsletter. UXI will be sharing best-in-class UX research practices as well as in-depth interview content so you can excel at your career in UX. This kind of helps us transition quite well in terms of the kind of wane down of Flash. When did 2Advanced and you feel the transition was really happening, and when did it hit you that, you know, Flash is on its way out?
You could kind of feel it in terms of, I think it was around the time we were doing a project for Call of Duty and we were trying to integrate real-time stats with Flash or something like that. We were dealing with just a lot of different types of information feeding into Flash and everything. And it just all started to feel really kind of heavy, bogged down. And then there was a lot of discussion with the whole Apple situation, you know, and not supporting it on mobile devices and things.
Sure.
You could just kind of feel the culture kind of shifting underneath your feet. It's like you could tell something was about to change. And it was around that time when I just kind of could foresee the future. And I wanted to kind of leave 2Advanced on a high note. I didn't want to kind of just have it fade away or go bankrupt or something, you know. So I think it was around that time when I decided, I think I'm going to return to my love of motion graphics and change my path and do that and let the kind of the web sort itself out. And then maybe it can come to a point where we're kind of return to building interactive experiences that mean something again. There's been a period of time where Flash is sunset, it's gone away,
Hmm.
and a lot of people miss some of those interactive things that Flash could do. And so that's why now you're starting to see these new tools coming about that do what Flash could do in a lot of ways, but still fit in with the browser and being able to display on different platforms and everything without any issues. So
Interesting. And so around that time, the first iPhone was launched, 2007, 8 time. Were you starting to create mobile experiences too? Just normal websites, not Flash, obviously. Was that becoming part of client queries and projects?
yeah, it was kind of an interesting time because you always had to kind of figure out if you're building these really immersive experiences on the web, what is the mobile version of that? And I think there was an understanding that mobile phones weren't at the point where you're going to be able to do really immersive stuff just because of the format is so small. It's kind of hard to interact with.
Yeah.
So we're basically having to work with mobile only version. So you'd have to kind of create like an alternate version of the website and decide what kind of content you wanted to display on that. So there's the whole process behind that, the whole mobile version.
And so when that came about, did any of your UX practice change? Did you get into more prototyping or wireframing or get an understanding of native components and elements that you had to work to or consider?
Yeah, I mean, we basically had to build a whole team internally that was kind of dedicated to mobile experiences and people who understood those kind of things. And we would have to think about how we're going to do that. In our offices, we basically had these walls that you could kind of just like draw on with marker, On one
Okay.
side of the wall
Yeah.
would be the desktop version. On the other side would be the mobile version. We just kind of work in tandem and figure out how we're going to bring it all together.
Yeah. And so post iPhone responsive web, as we move on, you wanted to focus on your animated work that you enjoyed doing most. Is it that you didn't do as much website work then, or you were just only semi-involved?
I built so many website experiences up to that point.
Yeah.
And I just feel like I needed a little bit of just a kind of change in my lifestyle. And so I took a sabbatical to New Zealand.
Oh, good.
And started to kind of think about what I wanted to do with the rest of my path. And my wife and I were on a beach walking one night. And we decided, I think we're going to change our lives. Let's maybe move to a new place. Let's start something brand new. And so that's when I kind of chose to do like a motion graphics consultancy and work with different clients around the world. And that's kind of how all that started.
That's amazing. It doesn't really surprise me either because you had done such a hard run for nearly 10 years of 2Advanced, and the hysteria that you created around the world and the client projects that you were executing were bar none some of the best in the world being generated. You must have came to a point that you were quite tired.
Yeah, I mean, client after client is coming to you basically asking you to build award-winning stuff every single time, and it eventually gets very taxing. You have creative fuel and you have a reserve of it, and sometimes it just gets used up and there's like not a whole lot left, I just need a little bit of a break. I think I was at a point where I didn't want to be bogged down by the transition to HTML5. I knew there was going to be a lot of restrictions and restraints on what I wanted to do. And really, I just wanted to kind of be free of all that and just be a designer and to just build animations and videos that could tell stories and communicate in beautiful ways. And so that's kind of the path that I chose to take.
Nice. I guess to shift gears just a little bit, if we go to ericjordan.com and we look at the show reels and some of the trailers, the design, the creativity, the animation work is stunning. We look at some of the brand work you've done for the likes of Tesla and Panasonic, to name some of the brands. Talk to me a little bit about those projects and where those projects are used and what your process is like there.
So a lot of what I do now really varies from project to project. It feels like every project is vastly different from the next. One week I'll be working on with a company in Singapore to develop like branding and a motion package for a conference that's going to be displayed on, huge screens. And then the next week I'm working with like a producer on a documentary film to produce whatever elements he needs for the film to tell a certain narrative. I've done a lot with UI design for physical vehicles. A lot of cars have displays in them now, so I'm doing a lot of that type of stuff.
Oh, wow. Okay. Amazing.
to really crazy stuff. Like I just got to do a collaboration with Shane on some very cool things for SpaceX that we built that actually are used on board the Dragon spacecraft, which I can't talk too much about.
Wow.
Projects like that are like, compared to like sticking with websites and things, like these are things that really get me excited right now, that kind of break the mold of what I'm used to in terms of getting my work out into physical vehicles or spacecraft or whatever, So I try to involve myself in projects that are trying to like change the world in big ways. And that's kind of where my focus is right now.
That's fantastic. So you're actually generating some of the UI, maybe for some of the interactive panels within SpaceX and in some cars, obviously, too. That's what you're referring to.
Yeah, I mean, some of it involves audio too. Some of this isn't actually even graphics related. So that's fun too.
Sure.
But yeah, I've been working with like Faraday Future to develop like a dynamic EQ system that's all rendered in 3D, and it's kind of like undulating in different ways organically to the music. So like these are new types of UI elements that are incorporated into new types of electric vehicles that are like driven by AI systems. So like that car had like, I think it had like 4 or 5 different screens inside of it. And so all those screens needed to have different types of visual elements. And so they basically came to me and said, like, what do these things look like? What's the user experience? How do we create something that's interesting and compelling that's not just a bar? Those are the things that really kind of get me excited.
Yeah, that's sick. Absolutely. And so it's interesting though, because that's bringing UX up to a different level, like we discussed, where some of the elegance is coming back into the experience, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. When you have a vehicle that's got multiple screens, there's a lot of things you have to kind of consider in terms of not being too distracting, but doing something that's a little bit different. So there's a lot of different kind of challenging things that you have to balance and figure out together. And I really enjoy that problem solving process, when you have to kind of sit with the client and figure out what is this experience and how do we do it right and how do we do it to where it's not overly gratuitous. Those are kind of fun challenges that I enjoy working on.
And in that instance, did you get to spend time sitting in the vehicle? Did you get to spend the time getting to know the car or the components or the electrics in any way that affect some of the experience or the atmosphere of the internal cabin?
I really wish that I did, but sometimes it's difficult being in New Zealand to be able to travel with the schedule and the timelines and the deadlines and everything. So, but one of the incredible things of working right now is that you can work from just about anywhere with a team across the world. And that was one of those projects where I got to work with multiple different people and companies in different locations around the world. And we would all just kind of contribute, our locations and contribute different elements of the project to kind of bring it to life. So it was great. It was a great process,
Amazing. A couple of fun little things I wanted to chat on was around your tool set, your kind of arsenal that you have behind you. I see through a lot of your work, obviously, there's lots of video editing and animation. Are you sitting behind particular 3D tools like Studio Max or Maya or any of those type of tools too that are part of your overall execution?
Yeah, so I'm pretty much a Cinema 4D person.
Sure.
When I was running 2Advanced, it was actually a really talented 3D designer by the name of Mark Wisnowski, who was using 3D Max at the time, and he taught me a lot of the basics of 3D. And 3D Max, the interface was a little bit too daunting for me, and so I would find myself not using 3D as much as I wanted to. Cinema 4D is really intuitive, just the way the interface is built, and so I've always used Cinema 4D for my 3D work. I'm doing a little bit of experimenting with Blender because there's a really huge repository for really powerful tools that plug in with Blender that allow you to build all sorts of incredible things using nodes and things. So that's something I'm experimenting with. And then I usually do use After Effects for my comping. I do most of my design now in After Effects because I'm using a lot of different types of effects to build the looks that I'm after.
Yeah.
And what's really great is I do a lot of consultation with plugin designers who I get to kind of give my direct feedback and beta test a lot of the new plugins coming out. And that's a really cool process because I could tell them kind of exactly how I'm working, what I need, how they can better adjust the interface so that I can accomplish tasks that I need to. And so that's really cool, being able to kind of contribute to plugins in that way.
That's awesome. I've used a lot of 3D too. I've worked in Blender, and I actually used to use Lightwave. Like you, I found 3D Studio Max to be extremely difficult. And then just in regards to your audio stack and how you generate your music and sounds.
Back in the day, I used to use this program. It was called Scream Tracker. And it was basically coded by someone in like Finland in the demo scene there. And it was this very basic kind of 8-bit program where you could like kind of sequence music. So I kind of learned on that when I was really young. And then I started buying synthesizers. Eventually started using Ableton Live. And Ableton Live allows me to integrate all my synthesizers together along with digital VSTs. Those plug into Ableton, and I can kind of coordinate through MIDI all the different physical synthesizers with the digital synthesizers to write tracks and to sequence drums and all that kind of stuff. And then I also use a program called Bitwig Studio to do a lot of production now as well. So.
Some of the DJing work that you've done too, I've listened to some of your tracks on YouTube and they're awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you must spend quite a bit of time working on some of your personal music too still, do you?
The DJ sets that I used to release under Neverrain was kind of developed a huge community following in actually the design industry. A lot of designers used to listen to those sets for getting through their workflow, So there's a lot of people who come to me and say, that music's really important to me. And so I always make sure that I keep up with that because I know that there's people out there who really like those sets and things. And so I'm still doing a lot of that, and I'm moving more now into trying to do a lot of my own custom production now and thinking about releasing a lot of new tracks coming up. So that's something I'm working on for the future.
I guess a final question would be, how do you manage your time? With all of this going on between music and design, what does your day look like, and when do you take breaks, and how do you know when it's good to take a break and give yourself some free headspace? And it'd be just really interesting to know how you organize your days.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, someone like me, I'm managing so many different projects at the same time. And also, I'm getting ideas flowing to me on a constant basis just because I have an overactive imagination. Yeah. And so I need a system to help me capture those ideas and file them away so that I don't forget them or lose them or what have you, Mm-hmm. And so basically I've perfected a system where I use a digital to-do list. I use Todoist to kind of a dumping box for kind of all my ideas. So I throw all my ideas that come to me into that, and then I use a physical to-do list using like Moleskine notebooks for my daily to-do list, because there's something about like physical paper, like the gravity of it makes it feel more tangible, and it just feels better checking off those tasks. So I use kind of a combination digital and paper system for that, and just kind of getting my ideas together. And then I use Evernote as well for just kind of screenshotting things, throwing things together, color palettes that I like, I'll dump in there, So Evernote's kind of like my reference repository system that I use for just gathering ideas. And when I'm working on personal projects, I'll kind of plan it out in Evernote as well. And then just in terms of taking breaks and things, I try to use timing systems that will remind me to take a break after a certain interval of time. Because I need that, because I'll get lost in the zone and I'll be in the flow state and I won't stop. So I kind of need those external reminders to take me out of that and remind me that it's time to take a break. I do a ton of physical fitness, I make sure that I exercise and stretch and all those things, because I sit at a computer a lot of hours during the day.
No, it's good. It's something that I try to keep in check as much as I can too. If it's yoga or cycling or getting out for a run, you can get absolutely lost, and it can be, like you mentioned, it could be 2 a.m. in the morning or 12 at night, and you realize you're still working away in the zone on something. And
exactly.
you realize tomorrow morning I better just take it easy and go do some exercise.
Absolutely.
I'll wrap it up there and won't take too much more of your time. It has been an absolute honor to chat to you, just to learn about your process, how your life has evolved since the late 90s up until now, the whole 2Advanced experience and how it shook the design world and the web world. And I think the long-lasting influence that you brought to a lot of keen designers like myself that you brought into our lives was just massive.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
The influences throughout the years that it brought to a lot of people has just been immense. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mark. It's been amazing to kind of recap everything. You know, I don't get to talk a lot of kind of the history of things and how everything unfolded. And so it's special to kind of go back into some of that history and just kind of explore it, and really appreciate that the work moved you in some way. You know, that's all you kind of want to accomplish as a designer, is to affect people and inspire people on some level. I totally appreciate it. So thank you, Mark.
If you've learned anything from this episode, I ask one small favor. Please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or share this episode across your networks. Both really help the growth of the podcast and will allow me to continue to secure amazing guests that will part their insight with you. Thanks for listening to the official UX Institute podcast, and talk to you next time.